So, I want to get into the first topic, and that topic is fantasy football. Well, I guess it's not the first topic. I did talk about the data mining project, but this is the first non-channel related topic. So, fantasy football, a lot of people will hear about it on commercials. It does have a large following, so a lot of people play it. I personally play it, and a lot of my friends play fantasy football. But for someone who possibly just doesn't know about football in general, or they watch football but they've never actually attempted to play fantasy football, it can be somewhat confusing. So I wanted to just sort of shed some light. And so if you have any questions specifically about fantasy football that you want to ask, please put those in the chat. But also, if you have any questions that you think other people have asked you a lot in the past and you do know about fantasy football but you just want to ask the question anyway, I'm open to that as well. All right, but first off, I have the paint window up here, so I'll be visualizing what I'm explaining. But I guess the first thing is that I should explain how a matchup works. So what happens is you have your team, and so this will be you, and this will be Kevin. And Kevin is also playing fantasy football. So you'll have your team and Kevin's team, and what will happen is you'll give it an interesting name. Usually the names are some sort of pun that is related to possibly a player in the football, in a football team that you like, or perhaps the actual team itself is in the pun, or it could just be a inside joke. So I like the Panthers, so I usually have my team name as Fig Newton because the quarterback is Cam Newton. But this year I have my team name as the Bread Basket because that is a inside joke between me and a couple people in the league, or most of the people in the league. So you have a league, and the league will have a given number of people. Usually it's an even number, so that every week each person has someone they're playing. But what will happen is if there's an odd number of people in a league, you'll have a bye week, so you just won't have to play that week. But what does it mean to play fantasy football? So I'll just explain how the teams are set up. So you'll have now this structure can vary a lot. This just happens to be the structure I see when I play a lot. So you'll have a quarterback. You'll usually have maybe 2 running backs. So that's another running back. And then you'll have usually 2 wide receivers. And now this is where it starts to get, where it starts to vary a lot, is that some people have a required spot for a tight end, and some people will have this as a flex position, which means it can be a tight end, a wide receiver, or a running back. But the league I'm currently in has a enforced position at tight end, so you have to put a tight end in. And then there's also a flex position between wide receivers and running backs. And then the final 2 spots are a kicker and a defense. So first off, I should probably explain what all these positions are. I'm not sure what the knowledge base is of the current viewers, but a quarterback is the person that throws the ball. You would probably know that even if you don't know football. A running back, you can assume, runs the ball, so the quarterback hands them the ball and they run up the field. A wide receiver is the person that the running back usually throws the ball to. The quarterback usually throws the ball to the wide receiver or the tight end. The tight end is also a blocker, so they're just bigger people usually. The running back can also receive the ball sometimes in certain plays. And then this is a flex position between wide receivers and running backs. So this means that you can put pretty much anyone you want in here, as long as they're a running back or a wide receiver. And then you have your kicker, who kicks the field goals if necessary, and the defense, which is just an entire defense of a team. Now, some fantasy teams will have another position in here, which is a defensive player. So we'll put a DP. So this is just one specific defensive player, and so I haven't ever played in a league that has this, but I have seen it, so I just wanted to mention that. So what will happen is you pick. I'll explain the drafting process later. So just assume that you've already gotten a team. So what will happen is you'll have possibly two quarterbacks, maybe just one, and so you choose the person you want to play as your quarterback for that week. So it's sort of like have a coach of a soccer team or a football team deciding which of his players he wants to put into those positions, or his or hers, sorry. So then there's these slots, and you have to fill them with players that play that position. So if I had Cam Newton, I would put Cam Newton in. So you'll just fill in your players here, and what will happen is you will get points for that week. And the way you score points is by having your players do well. Now, obviously, you don't have any influence on how those players play, but you as a coach can decide to play someone over another person. So if Cam Newton had a couple bad weeks and I had a backup quarterback, I could put the backup quarterback in as opposed to Cam Newton to possibly gain some more points on the next week. I personally don't think that would happen this season, but you never know. He could get hurt or something. And Kevin will also have his players that he's playing with. And so what will happen is both of you will have points scored based off of the individual players that you have. So I'm going to clear the slate here. So you have your quarterbacks, your running backs, your wide receivers, your tight ends, your flex position, which is just another wide receiver or running back, your kicker, and your defense. Now we need to look at how these individual players score points in this system. So the quarterback can do a lot. So the ways that I'm not going to focus on individual players, because what can happen is if these players actually switch positions for one play, then they can achieve the points of other positions. So I'm just going to explain how points usually work. So what will happen is you will usually get points per touchdown. And so touchdowns are big because in the game of football, that's how you score the most points at once. And so they're very important, and they are usually rewarded fairly highly in fantasy football. Now, in one of the leagues that I play in, you get 6 points. Now, this is a significant number because 6 is actually the amount of points you score when you run across the plane into the end zone to score a touchdown. And so you will normally see 7 as a touchdown, but that's also including the extra point. And actually, with recent changes in the rules of where the kick is taken from for the extra point, a lot of people haven't been either have been missing extra points or have been opting to attempt 2-point conversions, which would make 8 the amount that you score on a touchdown, assuming you're successful. But so some leagues will have 6. Some people think that 6 points is a little bit too significant because this kind of steps on the players that aren't involved in the actual scoring process, but perhaps help in getting the team down the field. So I have other leagues that will give you 4 points for a touchdown. But it is still a significant process because obviously if you get down the field but you never score points, then you don't win. So that's how the game works. But it can be all these point values can vary, and so but these are the normal slots that points are available. So you have running yards, and usually running yards is pretty straightforward. So in one league I have in one league I have the running yards are you get 1 point per 10 yards. And so the football field is 100 yards. If for some reason someone decided to run when they were on the goal line of their end zone, which actually happens a lot because a lot of times they just want to gain some yardage if they're stuck on their own goal line, then and then if the running back broke out and ran all the way to the end zone, they would be able to score 10 points from just running yards alone, and then on top of that, they would get the points for scoring the touchdown, assuming they actually got into the end zone. But this is cumulative. So every play that the running back runs, they get points based off of this fraction that is applied. So some people will have this as 25. This, like I said, these numbers can vary, but this is the normal format. There's also receiving yards. So this is rushing, and then you will have receiving yards. Now, receiving yards are a little bit more interesting. So they have the same format as rushing yards. They can be 10 yards. Do abbreviation. So it can be 10 yards, it can be 25 yards, but there is also sometimes a PPR. So what this is a point per reception. So this is a significant total because if there's someone who is on a team where they tend to get a lot of short yards and they catch the ball here and they haven't really gained that much yards, then if they only gain 1 yard but they catch the ball, that's almost like they caught the ball for 11 yards, or if they ran the ball for 11 yards. So if you get what I'm saying, so this is 1 point no matter what, as long as they catch the ball. This actually means that if they were to, for some reason, go backwards and catch the ball here and then be tackled, they could still technically gain positive points even though they lost yards. And so this is why some people don't like the PPR leagues, but I tend to be a fan of them. I just like to see the number get higher and higher, although I don't like it to be overpowered. Some people have leagues where players can score like 150 points on their own, which is just kind of stupid. Oh, God. Okay, so I have the next set of points is, so we have rushing yards, return yard, this is receiving yards. Now, all of these can be achieved by running backs and wide receivers. A quarterback can also get rushing yards. If for some reason the quarterback lined up as a wide receiver, they could earn receiving yards if the running back threw it to them. There are certain plays where that happens, but it's kind of rare. And then also big ones, if your kicker kicks a field goal, then they get usually 3 points, because 3 points is how much a field goal is worth. But what will happen is in some leagues, if the field goal is from further away, so maybe from 40 yards, they'll get an extra point. If it's from 50 yards, then they'll get 2 extra points to make it 5. And it's usually in accordance with their with these yardage divided by 10. So anything under 30 yards is usually just 3 points flat. But then if they're further out than that by 10 yards, then they start adding more. And that usually caps at 60, so 60 plus, because what happens is most kickers can't kick a field goal from 60 plus yards. The current record in a game is 64 yards. I believe that's Sebastian Janikowski, a Seabreeze grad, just like me. But so 60 plus is usually a +3 bonus. So that would be 6 points. And if you'll see, that's as much as scoring a touchdown in terms of fantasy. So a 60-yard field goal is a significant thing. But field goals are important, and if you get a field goal, if you get a kicker that kicks a lot of field goals, then these points start to rack up. I always go for Dan Bailey, the Dallas kicker, because I tend to find that Dallas is good at getting into the red zone, but not necessarily so good at scoring touchdowns. So they tend to opt for field goals, and I get a lot of points. So you have field goals, and then you also have what the defense can score. So the defense can score, obviously the defense can score touchdowns. So if they intercept the ball and run it for a touchdown, they score. This is usually a defense and also special teams. Some leagues only have defensive points, but the special teams is significant because if perhaps a kick returner on the opening kickoff ran the ball back for a touchdown, they would in these leagues that have special teams included, they would get 6 points. And but there's also points for specific defensive events. So if the defense gets a sack, which is when the defense breaks through the line and hits the quarterback. I don't know why the quarterback is behind the running back, but we'll figure that out later. And then you can also get points if the defense intercepts the ball, so INT. Now, these interceptions can result in touchdowns, which would give extra points, but just the baseline interception themselves is usually about 2 points. Sacks are about 1 point each, and this is just what I've tend to see. Now, these can obviously vary, and also fumbles. So, fumble recoveries are also worth about the same as interceptions usually. So, depending on what the league has set them at. So there's a couple extra things in here. Blocked kicks that can result in points, but usually they're considered fumbles. So it's just a matter of if the team gets the ball back. And then also some leagues have kick return yards, and so this is a significant feature, because actually what will happen is if there's a team that tends to allow a lot of touchdowns, this will kind of even it out for them because they tend to receive a lot of kickoffs, and so the 20 yards or so tends to add up. But with the league pushing towards having a setup where the kick returns tend to end in touchbacks more, because there's been a lot of problems with concussions on kick returns. It's just a bunch of people running as fast as they can at each other, and that tends to be a stupid idea. These kick return yards have been dwindling. So finding someone who actually gets kick return yards is kind of significant nowadays. But there are still some leagues that include kick return yards. This can affect individual players. If it were a running back that also returned kicks, then they would accumulate yards. But also sometimes the defensive special team will be rewarded per kick, per 10 return yards or per 50 return yards or something. And then usually the biggest points for a defense, at least in the start of a game, is shutout points. So what will happen is sometimes leagues will have a setup where if the other team only it doesn't score anything, the defense will get a bonus of like plus 10 points. So they'll start out with a base of 10 points. And so this is a significant feature because it's a solid 10 points that can be added or reliable. But obviously most teams tend to score points. It's not like soccer where there tends to be a lot of 0-0 games that drag on and on. So there will be perhaps if the team scores 4 points, which would mean they scored more than just... okay, if the team scores 3 points, usually there's like a 1 point deduction from this base 10. But if the team scores over 3 points, so this is just basically if the team scores at all, then they lose 1 point from their shutout. If the team scores more than 3 points, which means that they scored a touchdown or they scored several field goals, so that'd be 4 to, I'm not sure, maybe like 10, 4 through 10, then they'll subtract another point, and this will keep amping up. Usually the gaps tend to spread out a little bit more, much like a logarithm. Actually, that'd be the reverse of a logarithm, but that's kind of insignificant for the conversation. So these are big points that the defense tends to score. So what can happen is it actually is somewhat misleading when you go into a game, because the defense will immediately have 10 points. The other team has 0, and these points will start to dwindle away. But usually by then, sacks, interceptions, and fumbles and touchdowns will start to fill in the gaps that the points lost have taken away. So that's the point scoring method. So what will happen is each individual player will get some total for their for that game that week, and then you will have some huge total down here at the bottom, and that's your score for the week. And so you want that score to be as high as possible, because if that score is as high as possible, then you are guaranteed to beat not necessarily. If your players are really bad and you get the highest score possible, then you could still lose. But you want to get players who are good enough so that even if you miss a couple judgment calls, you still score higher than the opponent you are playing. Now, there are a lot of situations where maybe one specific person will score the second lowest, so they're second from the bottom. They are number 2. But then if they're playing the person who is in dead last for that specific week, they still win. Whereas someone who maybe has the best score, the second best score, and then the person who has the best score, if they're playing that week as well, the person with the second best score will not win that week. The person with the best score will win. And obviously the person with the best score should win, but the question becomes whether the person with the second best score should have won, because this game sucked. But that's just how the leagues work, and it's reflective of how the NFL works, because if in the NFL you can't play multiple teams at once. You just play one team because you can't necessarily sync up the scores of a given game and decide that one team played better than another team in a different game, just because they weren't going up against the same defense and a bunch of different other factors. So this tends to cause people to think that they had relatively easy seasons. A team that would go on a relatively good record for that season, a lot of people who don't like those teams would claim that they don't have a rigorous schedule, and sometimes it is true. But how fantasy gets around this is that they usually have small enough leagues to where each player can play each other player at least once. And this means that if one player is completely bad, they auto-drafted and they got a bunch of running backs and they don't even have some positions filled out, then everybody gets a free win from that person and it evens out. So that's the idea. If this person were to wake up halfway through the season, then half of the people in the league would be screwed. But this is just something that is a difficult moral question when playing fantasy. Okay, so now that we know how a fantasy team scores points, we have to figure out how a fantasy team is, how you even get a fantasy team. So first off, you go on to one of the websites. So I know Fox does it. I personally play on NFL.com just because they tend to have somewhat more of a more appealing setup, I guess. Their features are pretty nice. There's also ESPN and I don't know, I think CBS maybe. These are all the different networks other than NBC. I don't think NBC has their own fantasy, but the different networks that actually have football on ever are the ones that tend to have the fantasy football online. So first you have to pick the website that you're going to play on, and then you go on and you pick a league. So there'll be a bunch of leagues and you say, I want to join this one. Or perhaps you get a group of friends and you create your own league, which is usually what happens. You usually play with people that you know, just because the trash talk is a lot better. And then once you're in a league, there's a date that you set for the draft. So some leagues auto draft, and those would be heretics. But there are two types of drafts. You have a snake draft and you have an auction draft. Now, I have not had much experience with the auction draft, but the auction draft is similar to the actual draft that the NFL has in a sense. So what happens is you're given some sum of money, and then the players are worth a certain amount of money based off of their projections for the next season. So then you have so much money to spend, and you have to decide whether a person is worth it if you want to go get the best player and spend all your money on one person and the rest of your team kind of sucks. Or you can get some good people and try and fill out a pretty even team. Now, the auction works, I would imagine, in the way that a normal auction would work. So what will happen is you will have the option of overbuying certain players, other coaches for a specific player. I'm not sure how the actual format does. Like I said, I haven't had much experience with it. The experience that I've had is with the snake drafts, and the snake drafts are relatively simple. What happens is, usually, at least in the first season that you play, the order of drafting is completely random. So what will happen is all of the coaches will get randomly put into slots, and so this person will be first, this person will be second, this person will be third, and so on. And so this is the drafting order. And you may say, well, that's not very fair. The person who goes first gets to go gets the biggest advantage because they can get the best player, and then on the next round they can get the next best player available. But this is where this snake idea comes in. So what happens is it goes down the drafting order and then comes back up the drafting order. So what will happen is the person in last, so my league has 14 people in it, I believe. Oh no, 12 people in it. So the person in 12th in the drafting order obviously can't get the best person usually unless everybody else in front of them is stupid. But then on the second round, they have first pick. So essentially, they have nothing to worry about between their picks. If they want to pick up two specific people and they're still available when they get to their first pick, they can pick up both of them immediately. So it's called a snake because it goes like this and so on, and it's not an oscillatory process. I was just running out of space. But it goes down the drafting order, so 1 through N, and then it goes N through 1, and 1 through N, and N through 1, all the way to, and the number of rounds that you have to pick people is based off of how many slots there are available on your team. So if you are in the league that I'm in, you will have a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex position, a kicker, a defense, and then I believe we have 4, I want to say 4 more slots for bench positions. So this is 9, and then you would add the 4 and you get 13. So actually no, there was 15 rounds, so there must be 6 bench positions. And the bench positions are just so that you can pick up extra players, like I was talking about previously. You can pick up more players for a specific position than you need, so that if one person were to get hurt, or in the case of one of my friends, if all of the people were to get hurt, then you have possibly a buffer zone that you can put these people in while you're looking for a better replacement. And so we can then begin the process of understanding how you pick up new players. So the draft is how you get your original team. But then after that, if you don't like your team, or if for some reason the team that was very good last year no longer does well, and you've picked a player on that team, or if a certain player tends to get hurt a lot and they do get hurt, then you will have to find a replacement. Now, if one of your backups is actually pretty good, or if they have a breakout year, then you can pop them into that position. All is good. But perhaps you want to find a new backup if the player that you've replaced is just god awful. So there are many ways you can do this. You can simply look at the players that have not been picked up yet. So this would be the player pool. So you can just imagine that there's all these players at a nice hotel resort, chilling out because they don't have to play football, even though they still play. This is just a fantasy. So there's your hotel resort, and everybody's happy. They're like, wow, we're still getting money, but we're not playing. And they're at the pool, and so here's someone that wouldn't be picked up, like Colin Kaepernick. And then perhaps you can look at who is available at the player pool, and you can pick them up. Now, this isn't just as easy as finding someone, clicking on them, and saying, I want this person. Now, in every league, you have a certain amount of people you can have on your team. In my league, it's 15. So what will happen is you can't have more than 15. So you have to go to probably someone on your bench, but maybe if there's someone in your playing field that you no longer want, you can swap this person in the playing pool with so they are dropped from your team, and the person in the player pool is picked up. That's the simplest that it ever gets. In some leagues, there is a waiver, and so what a waiver is basically the ranking of who gets the next player out of the player pool. So there will be a list of all the coaches, and the person who has the highest waiver priority. If let's say this is Kevin and this is Johnny, and Johnny wants this player, but so does Kevin. Well, Kevin is first on the waiver and Johnny is second, so Kevin gets the player. But it wouldn't be fair if Kevin was always first on the waiver. So what happens is when Kevin chooses this player, he loses his priority and drops down on the waiver wire. Now, these can be very complex algorithms for who has the highest waiver. It can be based off of perhaps who's doing the worst, who had a bad week, and maybe if someone needs to fill space. I don't know. I haven't really dabbled around with the intricacies of it. But I believe in my league, it's simply whoever most recently picked something drops to the bottom. So it's not like a reshuffling every week. So then once you're at the top of the waiver, nobody can stop you from picking up a player. And the way this works is the requests are held until a certain day, and then when that day comes around, then it's all calculated. So if someone were to have requested it, and if someone wanted this player, and then a couple days later, this same person or another person that's higher on the waiver comes and says they want that player, then at the end of the waiver for that player, they will the person that is higher on the list will get that player. And so they will be able to pick the player up and drop whoever they want off their team, and the other person has to go looking elsewhere, perhaps just for another person in the player pool. But there are other ways that things can that players can be acquired. So there are also trades. And the way that trades work is that you have your team, Kevin has his team, and so maybe Kevin has one really good player and some bad players. And then you have some okay players, but you want this really good player. And so if Kevin's team is doing bad in general, you can offer him perhaps two good players for one of his for his really good player and one of his really bad players, with the hopes of claiming that you can that Kevin will have a more even team, and then you would get this better player, and maybe you have someone on your bench you can fill in for this bad player that is from Kevin's team. So this is something, it's pretty straightforward. the trades are proposed from one player to the other. The other person can either accept or reject that trade, and it goes on like a normal trade would, I guess. Now, in some leagues, and this happened last year in one of my leagues, there is a veto process. So there isn't just this accept and it's all good idea. So this goes to the judge, jury, and the court. And so once the trade is accepted, everyone in the league is notified, or perhaps just the league manager is notified, and they can decide to veto this trade, because there are some cases where trades can be bad. So if maybe you've had a really good season, and like your girlfriend is playing in the league, and she is having she's playing against some guy that you don't like, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna trade all of my good players to her for 1 week, and then she's gonna just walk all over him, and then he'll lose and I'll move into the playoffs. That's obviously a bad moral situation. And so these veto systems are set up to avoid that. But usually what people do is they say that up to a certain point in the season, you can trade, but after that point you can't, because it gets to the point where if you realize that you are not going to the playoffs, you could just tell your buddy that you're going to give him all your players, and then your actual good players, and then he'll be unstoppable in the playoffs. And so we don't want that, and that's usually how that's handled. But that's pretty much all of fantasy. So it's just supposed to be kind of like a fun way of enjoying the sport of football, or any sport for that matter. I believe there's fantasy baseball, there's fantasy basketball, and I'm not sure about soccer or MLS, but maybe. But what this does is it actually allows you to enjoy games that maybe aren't your favorite teams. So what will happen for me is I will watch games now from of other teams other than the Panthers, because there's a specific player that is on that team that I maybe have or I had in the past, and now I just like watching that player. And so it brings a little bit more enjoyment in my eyes to the game. But it also raises some questions, because maybe the player you have on your fantasy team is playing against your favorite team. And so I was just talking to my friend the other day, and he said that if a player is playing against his other team, his favorite team, then he will not put them on the field. And then if you're playing in a league where there's money on the line, then that becomes more of a back and forth question. But I guess what I'm getting to saying is, what do you think about how fantasy sports, fantasy football, fantasy basketball, how do you think that affects the way that games are enjoyed? So if you have any comments on that, please post them in the chat or in the comments later. But this is pretty much all I wanted to talk about. I did go pretty long on fantasy sports here, so I'm going to be moving on to my next section, which is the random drawing section. But I will attempt to play an ad. I'm not sure if they're working. And then I'll just give it a little bit to rest my voice and move on. So I'll be right back.